Welcome to the Resilience Report, where each week we share the latest on companies engaging in inspirational solutions for our planet and engage with ecopreneurs and lighthouse leaders disrupting the respective industries in pursuit of better, more resilient business. I'm your host, Lauren Scott. Thank you for joining me as we dive into this week's report. If you're a regular listener of the Resilience Report, you probably already know that I'm a huge fan of all things responsible fashion. From vintage to innovative recycled materials, I really do love this space. And yet I recently realized an important blind spot: accessories, and more specifically, jewelry, which is somewhat silly as jewelry really does hold the potential to be something that you hang on to much longer, arguably even across generations. So what was it that made me start thinking about the environmental and social impacts of jewelry? Well, one person was our next guest, Tonya Dickenson. In 2021, Tonya founded and became the creative director of Asymmetric by Design, a bold and sustainable jewelry company that empowers women to express their personal brand and values and connect with others. Tonya designs and creates one-of-a-kind asymmetric necklaces using exclusively natural, upcycled, and recycled materials while supporting traditional artisans in the developing world. Her jewelry has been featured on major Canadian news outlets including Global News and CBC, and worn on the red carpet in LA and on Dragon's Den, and reflects her passion for environmental and social justice. Before launching Asymmetric by Design, Tonya had a successful career in pharmaceuticals, mental health, and mask awareness, production, and distribution, where she focused on making a difference and helping protect lives. Tonya has an Executive MBA from Smith School of Business at Queen's University and a BAH in Pure Mathematics and Economics from the same institution. Tonya believes that we have won the lottery of life and that we should use our talents and resources to combat climate change and reduce inequalities, making the world a greener and better place for all. Tonya shares a number of gems, pun totally intended, on this episode that I know you're going to love. Well, welcome to the Resilience Report, Tonya. I'm so happy to have you on today's episode.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted.
You have a really rich, interesting background. I would love if you could bring our listeners through what those different chapters have looked like and how you got to where you are today.
Great question. It's actually, there have been 3 chapters in my professional life. And my first chapter was probably the longest. It was 25 years spent in pharmaceuticals here in Montreal, mainly in sales and marketing. And my last role was actually managing and overseeing all the marketing plans for Novartis, as well as the full 5-year strategic plan. So I really honed my business skills during those 25 years. Then the second chapter, we were fortunate to be able to live abroad. I lived abroad as a child and I wanted to give that same experience to my children. So I spent a magical 8 years in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi, when it was calm. And there I worked on a project-based. So I did, for example, the Special Olympics. I ran the tennis arm for that. I love playing tennis, and that's probably the only sport I'd be qualified to run. And I also did all kinds of huge international marketing campaigns. You're thinking of Emirates Airlines or Uber Eats. And so that was really fascinating. And it was really to understand also all the cultures. And so that gave me really a true global perspective and how to market to the various markets, because there's actually a lot of differences even within the Middle East in terms of marketing campaigns. So really to adapt that to the target audience. And finally, third chapter, which is probably the most surprising for me, is during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, based on my anti-infective background, I realized that the only thing that could really stop the virus while we waited for a vaccine was the mask. So I sprung into action and launched Army of Masks. We produced 80,000 masks, disposable masks for free for doctors here in Montreal and all over North America. It gave me sort of the confidence to, wow, if I could do something in a complete lockdown with access to no resources. All the stores were closed. We were, isolated to our house. We were basically
Yeah.
on lockdown in our house, confined to our homes. And I could launch my own business. So I really thought long and hard about that. And I launched Asymmetric by Design about a year later. So it's been a year that we're in business and loving it.
Well, I would love to hear more about this new chapter for the past
Yes.
year. And
Yes.
so before we started chatting,
Mm-hmm.
I said, admittedly, I am very big into fashion and love vintage fashion, sustainable fashion. And I have just never really thought about jewelry. I love jewelry, but I've never really thought about the sustainability side. And I would love to hear how you've incorporated this approach into your work. And maybe if we think about sustainability even more broadly, there's definitely both social and environmental considerations. So if you could help share a little bit about those two sides.
Definitely. So just a little parenthesis, I've been collecting antique components all my life. So 45 years, I've been collecting pieces from all my travels and whenever I lived. But when you think about sustainability in jewelry, you're right, there's two components. So the environmental, when we think of mining, so that is a huge carbon footprint that leads to greenhouse emissions, but also use of water and the whole production and the distribution, of course. And when you think of mining, you also think of deforestation. And I think the statistics are 20% of global deforestation are due to mining. And that could be the mining of gold, that could be the mining of precious metals or stones. So that's the environmental aspect. In terms of social, it's really the labor conditions. Often it's child labor. So for instance, I traveled to Sri Lanka and we visited where they mined precious stones. These were very small shafts in the earth, just reinforced by wood planks. And during monsoon season, these would collapse and the workers would die suffocated in these shafts. And so this was really, very sad for me. And since these shafts are so small, often they would send children there as well. So it really depends on what raw material is being produced. For example, low carbon footprint would, for instance, be pearls, which require low carbon footprint, as well as quite good conditions. You're essentially putting an oyster in the water for a few years. And then you're thinking of some of these stones are actually financing wars. So you think of the blood diamonds in Sierra Leone. And jewelry, for instance, if you go to a beach shop, the transparency of the sourcing is almost non-existent. There's really only about 30% can really tell you where these things come from. And it's mainly these precious stones. And if not the rest, we don't know where it comes from necessarily. And we don't know in what condition it's been produced. So in terms of labor and fair trade, it's a big question mark.
It's so interesting and definitely, in other industries, we might think of certain certifications and it sounds like there might be some, but very limited. So how did this translate to your vision for Asymmetric by Design? Because you mentioned briefly that you've had this 45 years of collecting beads and how this has led to where you are today. So I'd love to hear more about that.
So I really thought I wanted a brand that was sustainable, but really also aiming to become a net positive and B Corp. So I wanted to have both the sustainability component and the social component. Since there was a lack of transparency in terms of the production or the mining of most of these raw materials, and I've been an avid collector of antiques, I love vintage like you and antiques, I said, well, it's much easier for me to focus on things that exist. Okay, then I guarantee that there's been no issues in terms of labor. I can guarantee that there's been no issues in terms of mining or deforestation. This is something that's been done 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago. It exists right now. And it might be not going to a landfill. So I decided to use predominantly vintage and antique material. I'm also using recycled material from a vendor I have here in Montreal that supports local artists in Africa, in Mali, in Ghana, where I don't have a full clarity in terms of that. And I hope to develop, because obviously everything we do is incrementally better, is getting a full transparency in terms of their carbon footprint in terms of my recycled materials. I assume it's still better than, producing plastic now, but I'm not sure. And I'm also investigating all kinds of material that would have a low carbon footprint, such as the lava stone. It's spewing out in Iceland, so there's no mining issues.
Interesting.
Yeah. I've gone to the pearl farms again. I think it's very sustainable. So I'm really looking at, if I'm sourcing materials, I want to source them for the right place. And then I want to make sure that they have a very minimal carbon footprint. So this is how I've decided to orient my designs and my collection and my material. So I'm very determined in terms of what raw materials I use.
I love what you were just saying of incremental improvements. I think sometimes we have paralysis by analysis and we want to do this amazing project and we get a little bit nervous about having everything perfect from the get-go. So I love this incremental learning. And I think that that's what we all need to do to find these more sustainable solutions. So congratulations on taking that approach. If there are people or listeners in the jewelry space and maybe they're interested in getting a little bit more sustainable, maybe taking one of those incremental steps, what would you recommend they do as maybe some of those first steps to become either more socially or environmentally conscious in their practices?
Well, again, if they can ask their suppliers about certification, do they have certification? Where are they coming? So ask questions. First of all, think of using recycled materials. Think of, circular fashion. So, offering redesign services. We often think of that in terms of melting gold, melting silver, resetting diamonds. But it can be really anything. So offering that service or repairs as well. And then there's innovative products and designs. My daughter just got engaged, and this new generation is going with lab-grown diamonds. And so there's all these different products that are very interesting. And, I'm exploring different things. I'm exploring laser cutting of items that would have been basically thrown out. So how can I, take things that would be destined to landfill and actually transform them into something really amazing and beautiful? There's all these new technologies. I haven't explored 3D printing. There's all these things that we can explore. But definitely there's, I've come to understand that, innovation is a muscle that needs to, and creativity is a muscle that we can work on and we can just think. And so I think I'm very optimistic about the future, including jewelry.
And you mentioned exploring new technology, maybe like laser cutting. Are you working on any specific projects right now that you're particularly excited about and that you can share with listeners?
Okay. So I'm exploring different suppliers, yes. Okay. But what I'm most excited about, and I'm currently in the process of updating it, is I'm a mathematician by education. That's my first love is math. So I have a degree in pure math and economics from Queen's. And I just love solving problems, love making models, love forecasting, which is a little bit surprising since I'm also artistic.
I was going to say those are kind of polar opposites in my mind, but that's beautiful that those come together.
Yes. So this summer, when I was really, trying to say, okay, how can I also educate and change the customer's mindset and realize that we all have influence, like we all have also a power to make changes, for the better of the planet. And so I've been researching, how can I quantify the actually environmental impact that each one of my designs is making, and on an individual basis. So I love vintage clothing, as do you. And so one of the biggest resellers is The RealReal. So these are all certified clothing, certified jewelry, certified everything. They're secondhand, they're being resold. So I said, okay, this is the closest market and the biggest, and they actually have a really robust sustainability calculator for every single one of their items. So I made an economic model. So I backward engineered their sustainability calculator. I talked with them. I talked with also their consultants. discussed. They couldn't believe I had backward engineered it, but I had figured it out. And so I was able to identify if something was made of man-made, so resin, for example, versus something that was mined, the carbon footprint in terms of water saved, as well as carbon saved by using something that's secondhand. And so now I'm updating the website with that data on for each individual product. And so that I'm very, very excited about. So then people will know when they buy this necklace, it's not a huge savings and impact, but still it'll start getting the wheels thinking, oh, maybe, wow, everything I do actually has an impact. And, everything adds up and is cumulative. And if we all start thinking that way, we can really bend that curve. And so this is what I'm actually most excited about. So I'll have that for every one of the items that are for sale, not the ones that have been sold, because it's based on the weight and all that. So
interesting. That is so neat. And I have not seen that done. So that is very, very innovative. And while I don't have that mathematics background, I certainly have that. I would love to see the data. And I think that, to your point, maybe not everyone will understand all of the calculations, but they'll certainly understand enough to have a conversation starter and to be more mindful about their purchases. So I think that's beautiful. Another interesting part beyond your education is that you've lived in, correct me if I'm wrong, you've lived in 11 countries. Is that correct?
Correct. I've lived in 11 countries. I've actually worked in 3, and I've traveled to over 100, wow, many times. And no, I have a passion for traveling, but it's more a passion for people and culture and history. So that's my real fascination.
I'm curious as well, as you were moving around, did you see a difference in terms of how we approach sustainability from country to country? And has that been changing over the years from what you've been seeing?
Yeah, so that's a very broad topic, and very broad. And so I'm going to answer it in a maybe different way.
Sure.
And it's been really over my 45 years of traveling, so it's changed as well. But in terms of consumption, for example, so I'll talk about in terms of consumption, maybe in terms of recycling and waste, and then in terms of sustainability projects. So in terms of purchasing, when I lived in France, for instance, I was quite surprised that people shop almost every day for their food, for what they were preparing that night. So the fridges are very small, the apartments are small, but also the waste is almost non-existent in terms of food. And in 2016, even the government passed a law that the grocery stores were not allowed to waste any food. It had to be given away before the, best before date. Whereas here, it's Costco, it's Walmart, we shop for a week and then, the bananas go bad or the avocados go bad or what. And so it was so different for me, just that how we shop. So depending on where you are in the world, it's very different, and that really affects the waste. Europe also is light years ahead of us in terms of recycling. I think Sweden is down to 99% is no waste. I mean, it's unbelievable. And recycling for me, I discovered that at the age of 10 in 78 in Egypt, because they recycled for necessity, to be able to get money. Other countries, for example, Ethiopia, they basically throw away nothing because they have no money. And so it's like, wow. So the difference in terms of overconsumption and overproduction is really was shocking for me in different countries, including right now. And that still applies today. And then if you look at projects, then in terms of sustainability, for example, right now, South Africa is, planting, I think, 10 million trees. The UAE is really focused on water, on saving water. So every country has very different needs. And so it's a very complex question, but I'm optimistic that I feel that we're all moving towards the same page and we're all sort of feeling the pain. Unfortunately, the countries that suffer the most from climate change are often not those that are polluting the most. It's often the opposite. So we really need to get on board in terms of the developing world, in terms of to help the developed world needs to help the developing world, really. And we need to really step up.
Hopefully we can learn from some of these best practices around the world. Actually, when you mentioned France, I was thinking, I believe it was this past year, they've passed a law of kind of I was going to say right to repair. That's maybe not the right term, but there was a government incentive to repair your clothing and shoes, and they would actually give money to the tailors to help subsidize, I guess, when you are bringing in your clothing or shoes to get repaired, so that you're just not throwing them out, which is very progressive. So hopefully some of those ideas can come across the pond for all of us. You did mention you have a background in marketing and communications. You can definitely tell that you're very comfortable in sharing your story. And storytelling is such an important part of sustainability. Can you share a little bit about what you think the role of marketers and storytellers will be in terms of the arc that we're going to see for sustainable solutions?
Oh, well, I think that storytelling has always been important, but it has been more in terms of the benefits of the product. And so where I see this huge shift is in terms of purpose. So it's no longer all about the benefit of the product. It's the purpose of the brand, its impact on the environment, its impact on society. And especially the Gen Zs, the young generations are really holding us to account. Like, what are you doing to fight climate change? What are you doing to fight women's rights? What are you doing? And that did not exist when I started out in pharmaceuticals. It was really, we're here to help prolong lives. That was our, and in terms of environment and community, as a brand, I was really focused more on the good disposal of medicine, for example, so that doesn't go into our water streams. Or we volunteered one day a year. We ticked the box.
Yes,
but it was not the core purpose of the brand. And I think that that's really, really changing. And the companies that are able to communicate clearly to their employees, the purpose, to their stakeholders, to their banks, to their shareholders, to their consumers, what they're doing in terms of ESG will come out ahead for sure. So it's changed dramatically in my lifetime, which is quite surprising. I'm not ancient.
You're absolutely right, though. We're seeing this values-based connection, and it's beautiful to see. And it's, we definitely do have Gen Z to thank for that, of really pushing that and seeing employers taking those steps. And as part of that journey, so you mentioned you were in pharmaceuticals for the pharmaceutical industry for years, which is a very classic industry, you would say, and you struck out on your own to become an entrepreneur as part of the pandemic journey. What was that transition like? Was that just day and night, or did you feel ready because of some of those projects you took on? It just, as someone who has never done the entrepreneurial side, I would just love to hear what that experience is like.
It's a great question, actually, because I never in my wildest dreams thought I would become an entrepreneur. When I was young, I did not want to be an entrepreneur because I did not want to work, 24/7, 7 days a week. I wanted to have a family. I wanted to travel. I wanted all these things. So that was never in the cards for me. However, my career and then this army of mass really gave me pause and said, you know what, I can do this and I love it. And so it was quite a seamless transition, but I really spent a year thinking about it. Okay. Because during the pandemic, we actually did have time. There's not much to do. There was no traveling. You couldn't go out. Yeah. So I really reflected a lot. I read a very fabulous book of, actually a colleague of mine wrote it. It's Personal Socrates. And it really asks you a profound question about yourself. So I really spent a few weeks really going through this book and answering every question and being honest with myself to really find out what were my true passions. Not what I thought people wanted my passions to be, or how I thought people would look at me, or it's really being true and going to the core of my values, of my purpose. What could I bring to the table? And yeah, so it was actually quite a easy transition, but it required confidence. It required courage, especially to launch into something that was artistic, versus pharmaceutical and saving lives. A necklace doesn't save a life, but it does empower women.
Mm-hmm.
It does help to protect the planet, and I'm giving back. So it took a lot of I would say, courage, but I had tremendous support of my family, tremendous support of my tribe, and I'm actually surrounded by a lot of female entrepreneurs from pharmaceutical that have launched their own companies at the wonderful age of 50s, in their 50s. And no, we have a lot to bring to the table, and we have a very different outlook, I think, very different way of thinking. And we're often, I don't want to, categorize it, but we're often very values focused. And so it was actually quite a easy transition. And yeah, I hit basically to start running. And but there was a lot of planning. There's been a lot of reflection. I mean, just the branding was 2 months of work. Because it's a personal brand. So everything I do, it's a reflection of me. It's not selling a pill, somebody else's pill. Everything is my design.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of really reflection. So about a year to really get my purpose, my values, my pillars, my branding, my name, everything down pat. And once I was happy with that, then I was ready to launch. I needed my foundations to be very strong, but I had that from marketing. So it was not.
And maybe just to double click on the name, would you mind explaining what that thought process was of choosing as Asymmetric by design?
That's a great question. Actually, it came to me right away.
Okay.
So I don't like symmetry. I think it's boring.
Okay.
So if you think of a pearl necklace, for me, that's not as interesting as something like I'm wearing. So asymmetric, I loved. So that was done. Plus, I wanted with a brand to correct a lot of the asymmetries that existed in the world. The women's rights, for example, the inequalities. So for me, I was trying to correct that. So that also had that name. And then by design is artistic, but everything we do is also very intentional. Everything is by design. There's nothing that we're doing that is not intentional. So asymmetric by design, that's what it means.
I love that. I think it's so creative. It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful name. And just to go back to the entrepreneurial side, I am curious, now that you've gone through this experience and you look back on your career, do you think that you could have done this earlier in your career? Would it have made sense, or did it almost take that full trajectory to be able to do this? Like, this was the right time for you?
Excellent question. The answer is that no, I would never change anything. The pharmaceutical industry is probably the toughest business school in the world to go through. It is so regulated. It is, and rightly so. It is so tough. The reimbursement is tough. Everything about it is very, very difficult. So it makes it a fabulous business school. The networking I have is also incredible. And the level of professionalism as well in that industry. And then that whole army of mass and that pandemic really brought me a lot of confidence as well. And then the final part is, you mentioned the word timing. Timing is key. Sustainability is a buzzword now. Women's rights, climate change, writing the social inequalities, all that is coming to the forefront now, but wasn't there. Maybe if I'd launched something, using vintage and recycled materials 40 years ago, or not 40, 30 years ago, they would say, oh, man, that's happy maybe. But now women also are confident. Women want to feel empowered. Women are sitting at that table, and you don't want to blend in. When I was young, I had a closet full of navy blue suits or black suits. We needed to blend in, we couldn't be too feminine, And now I said, I just want to be bold. I want to differentiate myself. Now we have Zoom. These necklaces look fabulous on Zoom. Really different. You see, you see
Absolutely.
that necklace on that Zoom. And,
Yeah.
And so there's this coming of age also of women. And so I think it's the right product as well. So for all these reasons, I wouldn't have been successful. I wouldn't have launched it then. But now I think it's the right product at the right time. I really am convinced.
Absolutely. I read a quote the other day that said, if you can't fit in with the guys, you might as well be the woman. And so be the woman with the bold necklace. I love that. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful idea.
Yeah.
Do you remember a specific moment in time where you knew that you wanted sustainability to be part of your journey professionally? Was it, you mentioned 10 years old when you were seeing the different materials being reused, or was it later in your career?
So I have to be honest with you. I have always been in love with antiques and vintage because it's much more interesting. So my house is 1912. My furniture is all antiques. My dishes even are antiques. My clothes, often I buy secondhand because I want a nice suit, but I don't want to pay $1,000. So I've always looked or be attracted to antiques and vintage for their beauty, for their history, for the value. It's a great value in general for your buck. And it's only now that I realize that, unconsciously, I've been, all my purchase had been, with the planet in mind, but it was not really with the planet in mind. It was with beauty in mind and the preservation of history and expending my dollars and creating something that was very warm, that was unique, that was me. And so it was less sustainability than truly all these things. And now for my business, I'm trying to be only sustainable. But in my life, even my Christmas decorations are vintage. I mean,
Beautiful.
I just love it. It's antique snowshoes. I put bells on them, and it's spectacular. Like people stop in the street to take pictures.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's just, to want to be different, to want to, I'm like the opposite of IKEA, so things last, things last,
Yeah.
So I love auction houses, and I've just always loved that, the thrill of the find, this. So it wasn't really focused on sustainability when I was young. It was just really more focused on the beauty and the preservation of history. Yeah. That's how it started.
I think it's wonderful when we can see it doesn't have to be an or, it can be an and to see the beauty and it's sustainable. I think is really where you see the winning formula.
Yes, definitely.
And I'm sure you felt this when you're in the pharmaceutical industry, and certainly when you're doing Army of Masks, and then now where you are, that when you're doing purpose-driven work, it can at times feel like a lot, especially when you're a hard worker, which I definitely get the impression that you've always been a very, very hard worker. What tips do you have to keep yourself going and motivated and recommitted to the work when it can feel challenging at times?
Yeah. Oh, that's a big, big, big question. I think at first it's really identifying your purpose and, being very clear on that and, reminding yourself of that. Are you focusing on that? But then establishing milestones and breaking that down as well. There's an expression, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So, really having those small milestones and celebrating those wins. I have a mentor. I'm a mentor at Queen's, but I knew that I needed a mentor as well. So asking for help, surrounding yourself by a tribe. So I have a tremendous amount of female entrepreneurs. So I'm on a WhatsApp group, and so one of us is feeling down or a struggle. We're on the WhatsApp, and we're all trying to help each other and motivate each other. So that's really nice. Being part of different associations as well helps. And seeking out collaborators. For example, I've collaborated with Dress for Success. So,
neat.
Yes. So, when I was accepted in Fashion Week Montreal, which was a big surprise for me because I didn't think I would the first year, I collaborated with Dress for Success that shared my values of empowering women and sustainability. Everything they have is secondhand or donations from brands. And we partnered in, for example, we did a fashion show. Well, and that was great because I only had to, provide the jewelry. They did all the rest. So it's also dividing and conquering. You also need to prioritize self-care. So, making sure you're not working that 24/7, 7 days, taking time off, going for walks, enjoying your family, stopping and making dinner. And then for me, I'm not always super disciplined. So what I've had to do is really block off time in my calendar where there's no interruptions. And I don't even look at email. Like, I have to have these blocks of time where I'm either creating or doing social media, and I have to not focus on anything else. Be curious. Be a lifetime learner. Right now, I'm taking a lot of AI courses.
Interesting.
Just to see. You always have to keep on learning, thinking, and one idea gets to the other idea. I was taught that innovation is the recombination of two ideas, and sometimes it could be bad ideas. Like the Post-it is, paper and bad glue, but it's
yeah.
So, just that, and always, don't be scared to fail. Try. Doesn't work. Figure out why it didn't work. Readjust. We learn a lot from failure, much more, or, through little setbacks than we do through successes. And just bring your authentic self. Always and share with others your struggles, your successes. They love to see your humanity, honestly. And, sometimes things have worked and sometimes things have not. And you just keep on trying and trying and trying until, you get better. But people are very forgiving as well. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm trying to create a brand that will eventually be B Corp. But it's incremental. And I tell people it's incremental. This is what I'm doing. This is how I'm doing. This is the best I can do right now. And I'm looking. And if you know a better way, please tell me. And, and I think people respect that. And like you said, you can't go from zero to, B Corp. You need to, we're all learning,
Absolutely.
And I'm just trying this way, and I'm being very transparent and open. And, every year I hope to incremental improvements, but I'm very proud of what I've accomplished. This year has been amazing. Really.
You should be. It's been incredible. If our listeners are not yet following Tonya on LinkedIn, definitely do. It's very, very inspiring. And these are all such great tips. What would it be, maybe one of those tips or something else, if you were to give advice to a young woman, or maybe even Tonya just getting started, 45 years ago in the sustainability space, what advice would you have for that young woman coming in?
So I wouldn't necessarily have advice for somebody that's going into sustainability only, because in general, it applies to everything. And then once you've established that, then you can look at your whole business model and say, okay, how can I ensure that every single part is more sustainable? For example, what we're looking at next year is in part, we've been using bubble wrap, so that we're trying to eliminate. So in terms of our shipping, so there's aspects that we're not sustainable, not with plastic wrap. So, there's things that we have to tweak and correct. But it's really, if you want to launch, because your question is to launch a company?
To launch a company, or just even to, approach a career. It could be at a company that already exists, but that they really want to bring that sustainability lens. You mentioned Gen Z is searching for that values-based connection. So what would be a piece of advice there?
Well, you could look at companies that are already doing a fabulous job. Patagonia. You could ask your future employers, what is your purpose? What are your values? To make sure that they align with yours. And when you go into a company, when I was hiring staff, I always said the first 6 months, you have like these virgin eyes. You're seeing things for the first time. So you're seeing things that I no longer see and I take for granted. So any improvement, please let me know. And, it could be going through the waste paper basket, seeing what's being thrown out in the cafeteria, what's being thrown out there by people. Okay, well, how can we go to almost zero waste? So it could be things like that. There's lots of things that they could do within any corporation to become more greener, more sustainable, and also not forgetting the social aspect as well. How could they be contributing more to society and giving back without, taking everybody off work? So, it's really thinking outside of the box. And yeah, we can always make improvements. Always, always, always.
They're great recommendations. If people want to learn more about your work, where would be the best place for them to go check that out?
So the best place would definitely be on my website, asymmetricbydesign.com. So we have our net-à-porter collections there. They can also contact us for redesigns or ideas. If something's sold out, then we can potentially help do something similar. I'm also at the Montreal Art Center Museum, but it's best to contact me ahead of time to make sure that I'm there. And we're definitely reachable. We'll be at Fashion Week Montreal next year. And so very, very, very excited year ahead.
And then we'd just like to wrap up every episode with the same question, which is, what do you think it will take for businesses and leaders to be resilient going forward?
Oh, I think they have to really start looking more for their long-term view than the short-term quarterly profits. That would be my wish. I wish that they would have a more inclusive leadership, for sure. Focus on ESG and communicate with their employees, their purpose, with their stakeholders, their customers. Communication is very important. And, really think out of the box, innovate, embrace AI. It's here to stay. So see how that can, improve your business as well. So, there's a lot of real opportunities for optimism. And with all these crises, these are opportunities as well. So I want everybody to believe that they have a sphere of influence and they have the power to make this world a better place.
Well, thank you so much, Tonya. You are such a brilliant leader. So thank you so much for sharing all of your insights with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It was a real, real treat.
I hope that you've enjoyed this week's edition of the Resilience Report. If you would like to hear and see more, be sure to check out @The Resilience Report on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until we connect again, remember, even on the darkest of days, we all have the opportunity to be a lighthouse for others as we collectively pursue better, more resilient business.